We're very pleased to have Professor Eamonn Kelly with us to share his presentation. Just quick introduction, because time's getting on. Just to let you know, Professor Kelly is a professor in educational psychology at George Mason University and has earned his PhD in psychological studies and education from Stanford University and served at Rutgers University and the National Science Foundation. And his research really kind of focuses on design-based research, innovation, educational practices, and the intersection of maths, cognition. He's also a Fulbright scholar. And recipient of multiple NSF awards. So just want to welcome Professor Kelly with us today. And I'm going to turn the time over to yourself. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, there it is. That's very nice. That slide there is the only slide that was AI generated. Good. I just want to check, a voice check. People can hear me? Okay, great. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through these slides, but I want to allow enough time for questions because I'd like to know what it is that is getting people in this area interested in terms of AI. The title of the talk is "The Essence of AI in Education is Nothing Technological." It is reminiscent of a line from the philosopher Martin Heidegger, who produced an essay called "The Essence." It was on technology, and he said that the essence of technology was nothing technological. Technology for him were things like steam engines and mechanical devices. And the main point that he wanted to make is that it was important not to have the technology define human beings. Human beings should define the technology. And he had a philosophical method called questioning. Of course, this is translated from German, in which he advocated that people take a perspective on technology that centers human expertise and human values, and to be able to look at the technology for what it was and not to be identified with the technology or have the technology define what a human being is or should do. So that's where the title comes from. And in this case, I wanted to foreground expertise of teachers and education researchers, psychologists, those who have spent a lot of time understanding how people learn and how to design interventions that would be useful for them to help themselves or to help other people learn. Consequently, I'm going to mention AI, but I really want it to be an oblique reference. I don't want to focus on AI per se, but let's talk about it a little at the beginning. But I want to keep the distance from the topic or the technology that Heidegger was advocating, so that we are masters and mistresses of it, so to speak, rather than have it defining meaning. So, Catherine, next slide, please. So there is no time at all to describe AI, and as you'll see, it's not a finished product. It is going to continue to generate applications that are going to impact our lives, willing or not. The idea of AI, and I use it here myself throughout because it's a nice simplification, but unfortunately it covers a multitude of complex ideas, concepts, and applications that can get simplified into either policy makers who are writing documents, people advocating its use in business or other places, in which AI is used oftentimes now in business as a way to generate funding, in the same way that the internet was a tag that was used before the dot-com boom bust in order to convince investors who did not know much about the technology that they would somehow gain by being part of this supposed revolution. So it's important when you look at the words AI or hear about it, you've got to realize that this is a suitcase term, so to speak, or it's a pig in a poke, to use an American turn of phrase, meaning it's a black bag of things and you're not exactly sure what you're signing up for. So this slide here is just a simplification. But as you'll see, there are applications in the how. How does AI do what it does? And the ones that mostly affect schooling are generative AI and the chatbots, natural language processing. But notice that there are other things going on. In fact, some of the most useful developments for schools, not necessarily elementary, but elementary as part of a pipeline towards university education and new careers. Some of the best work is going on in machine and deep learning. So you can see AlphaFold there and protein folding. When I was at the National Science Foundation, we used to fund people to fold proteins, and a doctoral student would fold, do chemical analysis on a protein one time in about 4 years. And that is very slow progress. This program, AlphaFold, did a couple of million of protein foldings in a couple of months, which is astronomical amounts of time if human beings had to do this work. Interestingly, when you think about that, what happened then with Google DeepMind is that they released these millions of proteins and how they fold. And it's generating new drugs, new treatments of cancers, and it is revolutionizing the way we think about how the body works. So it's revolutionizing biology and computational biology. And there are many companies and universities that are invested in this. And in some ways, this is an unseen part of artificial intelligence in education, and one that is far more dependable. So if I was in a position of policy advice, I would suggest that a lot of attention be paid to how something like protein folding, central to biology, is changing, the tools that are changing, the ways that you think about how biology works. These should translate right down through graduate education, undergraduate education, secondary school, and then down as far as primary school. You'll notice throughout the examples that you see here and elsewhere is that the applications on the medical side are going quite well, except regrettably, most of the data that's been collected. So for example, there's a pediatric cancer institute in the US that's been collecting data for at least 1 decade, if not 2. Unfortunately, the data are not collected in a way that the deep learning can model it. It made sense for human beings who are reviewing the data, but unfortunately is not machine ready. So one of the major insights from a policy point of view is to think about how something as powerful as AlphaFold could be created in other areas of medicine, in this case, pediatric cancer. But there is a downstream question for how education data, should it be collected, what format should it be collected in, if it was attractive to do something like applying deep learning or machine learning techniques to better understand how people learn from a cognitive neuroscience point of view, or from data that might be collected through wearable devices that people may use, or activities that are going on in classrooms. This, of course, would require, serious societal questions about ethics and institutional review board, meaning that you're not doing anybody harm, you are properly concerned about privacy and so forth. But we're in a situation where the data that we have in the US, they've got the National Assessment for Educational Progress. Of course, we take part in PISA, PIAC, HIMSS, and other tests. But those two are not collecting data in a way that really can be suitable for deeper machine learning. And in terms of how education might think about AI, I think that more attention should be paid to that. You're probably quite familiar with generative AI, chatbots. The wearable computer visions, this is a growing area. And as you can see, Meta, Facebook is putting a huge amount of money into generating that. You can already buy them, These are sunglasses, or you can get clear lenses, in which there is a still camera. I think now they have a video camera, and you can speak to the glasses, and the glasses will take images or videos, and then it will take your prompt and analyze it on the web using Wi-Fi or data, and then give you the results back into an earpiece. That's quite remarkable. It probably is going to lead to a lot of redundancies in people who are giving tours in foreign cities, because you yourself can wander around and ask questions. And if you look at a restaurant, you can just ask the glasses, what is the Yelp rating of this place, or is this a good place according to TripAdvisor? So there's going to be on-demand information that's coming through the glasses, and these are already for sale. In the most recent version, there is an in-screen display in that they're able to project inside the lens images. And the person who's looking at you, by the way, doesn't see that you're looking at images. So it's a matter of time before you're going to have pretty much the whole suite of tools that we're taking for granted now available on wearable devices. Google and MIT are working on devices that are able to process silent speech. At the moment, they're somewhat clunky, but they're getting there. They're using brain image monitoring. The one that MIT has, it's a device you wear over your ear down to your jaw, and you speak internally. You're speaking silently, but you're forming the words, and it picks up on the muscle contractions, and it's able to turn that into text, and that text can then drive pretty much any technology. So it's a voice to text where the voice is silent. So all of these technologies are radically going to change the way we interact with it from a learning point of view. And at the moment, the chatbots and prompting are taking up a huge amount of the oxygen. And there should be some addressing of that imbalance. The key applications in daily life. So people say you should ban AI. Well, you hardly get by without it. My brother used Google Maps to drive me here. You've got a lot of program being done with GitHub. It's for fraud detection, marketing, as you can see. Anything that, so we got a revolution. We went from analog to digital, and pretty much everything has been digitized. And with the quote unquote AI techniques, we're learning how to find patterns in data that allow us to model things that we thought were impossible. You know, we had a Turing test after Alan Turing test, and it was assumed up until 2022 that a machine would never be able to pass as a human being. And I think we've gone right past the Turing test. And it's going to be an issue not just in deciding the other person if you're talking to a machine or a human being based on the content of what they say, but as you know, with some chatbots now, these things can be quite engaging because a lot is known about how to manipulate people emotionally. So huge amount of stuff happening. Policy, I think, should be thinking about all of these and making resources and training available for them. Staying with chatbots. So as you know, there are billions of dollars being spent. So you can expect these chatbots to become much more multimodal, much more intelligent, much more able to do reasoning and logic. And you've got not just ChatGPT, but Gemini, Grok, Claude are all of pretty much the major US ones. But you see there's a reference to Kimi K2 thinking. And this is a very cheap model, just came out of China. And in terms of language processing and reasoning, it's considered almost as good as the other ones that have cost billions. So you're going to be getting, nothing is going to stop a radical availability of these tools, and they're going to become daily more powerful. Next slide, please. AI is not only not settled, but it's continuously being changed. So as you can see, 90,000 AI companies. So these are companies that were doing something else and became AI companies, or they're startups. I think in the US at the moment, it doesn't say it there, but I think as of 2024, there were over 6,000 startups just doing AI applications. And most of them are probably in the chatbot side. Anyway, when you look at the amount of money that's being spent there and the anticipation of the amount that's going to be spent, OpenAI itself is talking about commitments of $1 trillion. This is effectively unheard of spending. And it's all being done to make the machine learning, deep learning techniques more efficient, reduce the amount of energy that's used, and also find applications. And notice the bottom line, the education sector is a major market for sales and subscriptions. OpenAI is talking about $1 trillion in commitments over 5 years, but they're not making that, and there's no way they could make that amount of money. So you'll see a big push by these companies to return money to the investors. And we should be forewarned that education is seen as an untapped market. And their goals are not necessarily to improve education. Their goals are to improve the bottom line and now return on all the money that has been put at risk. So it's important, again, as Heidegger would say, to have a distance from the technology so that there's not a bandwagon effect, or everybody is doing it, or it is fine or safe. We don't have the evidence to make that judgment yet, and probably won't for some time to come. Okay, Catherine, next slide, please. So if you are interested in keeping track of the many policy papers there are across the world, the OECD has a policy observatory, they call it. And this is just one page from it. But you can look up, you can find Ireland's policies, Guam's policies. You can find any policies that you like. And these are all works in progress because AI continually gets more complex. It puts itself into more parts of our lives. And as you see, there's big concerns about elections and misinformation. So if it interests you, you can go to this site and you can find there may be other places, but this, it says, is 80 jurisdictions and organizations. So again, if you're on the policy side or the educational side, or you're responsible for learners and you're interested in the current thinking on something, this is a place to go. Unfortunately, the shelf life of many of these reports is very short. So if, for example, they predate deep research in Gemini, ChatGPT, they all certainly predate the Kimi K2 from China. So their recommendations are going to be based on probably not obsolete, but dated considerations of the affordances of the technologies. And as you know, it creates a major headache for people in education who are being tasked to integrate, in some sense, some part of AI and to, quote, ensure that children are learning and that they're not exposed to risk and they're not plagiarizing and not cheating. This is a global phenomenon. I know in our own institution, this is a similar thing. Everybody has been given access to Microsoft Copilot, students, faculty, and staff. And there's some training, but certainly not enough training to be able to deal with the multiple disciplines that this technology is going to impact. Next slide, please. So AI requires continuous study. I note this great platform that you have here. Honored to be speaking on it. I only got a chance to listen to Keith Young's talk, but I would say if you haven't listened to Keith's talk, listen to it before you listen to a recording of this, because you can assume that everything that he said I agree with, and his points are well taken. This other thing called Catter, that's an Irish Centre for AI. I believe it's a free or subscription service that's cheap for businesses. But there's a recognition on the part of, I think they're funded by the Irish government, that it's very, very hard for companies to keep up to date with all the changes. Well, we need something just like that in education. And we needed it yesterday. Next slide, please. So there's a problem with early adoption, that you get onto a bandwagon and you get overly enthusiastic. So here's a case in point. South Korea, as you can see, it spent $850 million, the government spent, and the publishing companies put in an additional $567 million. And you would think that amount of money would buy you something. Well, it turns out there were technical problems. They claimed there was teacher training, but the teachers didn't seem to agree that it was sufficient. The students didn't know what to make out of it, and it has effectively been made supplementary when it was once required. So there's a huge amount of money that could have been spent otherwise. And in the spending on AI, it's always good to ask the question, what are the opportunity costs? So what could this have been spent on, especially as the subscription model kicks in and the price of all of these technologies tend to go up. So in the educational sector, better teacher training is good spending of the money. And I don't mean in AI, I mean good teacher training. And also providing teachers' aides, human tutors. It's important to think about the values that you've got when you're spending this kind of money. The other thing is that there may be advantages to AI, but something like this can turn. I'm sure the politicians in South Korea are not as enthusiastic for whatever would be the next set of waves. Okay, thank you. So this is just a case in point. So South Korea went in quickly. I believe that I think it's Sweden or Norway. Somebody else is making, I think it's ChatGPT available for everybody. That's the evidence really isn't in. We haven't done the studies. We don't know what questions to ask, and we don't have the evidence to decide on what series of criteria this is a good idea. So I think there's a lot of value in pausing. As you remember, Elon Musk was one of the people who joined the call that AI be paused. He has since gone radically forward with Grok, Grok, and a replacement for Wikipedia called Grokopedia. And the truthfulness of the claims in Grokopedia will be assessed by Grok. Next slide, please. So this is about the overselling of AI. So bear in mind that the investments in AI are driven by the profit margin, and the amount of money that has been committed is staggering. If you look at the American stock market, most of the gains are due to the so-called Magnificent Seven and OpenAI. But if you look on the S&P 500, 400 and something companies are just about holding flat or making modest gains. So there's a huge amount of commitment of dollars that need to be retrieved for return on investment. And I believe there will be major efforts to get governments to adopt these tools en masse on a subscription basis or to tie them into particular brands. So I think it's open skepticism is a good approach here. Next slide, please. So here is a case in point. So this is from Gemini, this is Google. And if you look then there, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to sell an enterprise. That means they're selling this to entire businesses. So they've got an ecosystem of 100,000 partners and they want to sell this thing. Notice that it says it's a no-code workbench for any user, anybody. Well, the data that's coming in on no coding or vibe coding is that it produces an awful lot of garbage code. And it takes people a long time to figure out what the machine was thinking when it produced it. And you sometimes have to go back and rewrite the code from scratch to find out if there are errors. Also, vibe coding, so-called, where you just believe that you can code by speaking to the computer in English. It requires a lot of skill to know that you're not introducing cybersecurity risks. And all of these things, if they're not paid attention to, there's huge liability. Notice that it talks about automating processes across organizations using a task force of pre-built Google agents. That's pretty much code for replacing humans. So it's important to look at that in terms of the cost. So you hear a lot about the environmental cost, but there's intentional cost to reduce human labor, because it's one way to recoup on the invested money. The other one is to generate so much positive economic activity that there's such a growth in the economy that takes care of the investor's debt. Notice that Gemini Enterprise securely connects to your company's data securely. Yes, cybersecurity concerns would maybe doubt that. A central governance framework so you can visualize, secure, and audit everything. Again, for somebody to be able to do that requires a staggering amount of metacognitive insight on a very complex ecosystem. And the chances that that's possible in paper, as you can see, but this has yet to meet the real world. Mike Tyson, the famous boxer, was asked what he thought about one of his rivals' plans, and he said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. I don't know if that's an apt thing here, but I think there is going to be a question when you look at some of the data that the hype here isn't going to be justified. Next slide, please. So here, for example, so this is people working in astronomy, and the top models there, Gemini and GPT-5, they're scoring very well, so to speak, on exams in astronomy. But if you see the bottom line there, even though they approach peak human performance in theory exams, critical gaps must be addressed before they can serve as autonomous research agents in astronomy. So what are they missing? They're missing conceptual reasoning, geometric reasoning, spatial visualizations. That kind of is astronomy. So you've got this other thing to contend with when policymakers get influenced by the fact that these machines can pass education exams, law exams, astronomy exams, and so forth. And it's not clear how much the machines have been trained on them and how good the questions are. That said, there are improving indicators. One of them is called Humanity's Last Exam. That's Humanity's Last Exam. And it's meant to be a really hard task for machines. The Kimi K2 thinking thing that I mentioned, they're claiming, I think, 46%. That's a staggering amount of capacity if it is really pulling that off. There's something quite remarkable going on there. And it may be the case that these machines end up having the output of seemingly intelligent behavior without necessarily duplicating each of the human aspects of what we would consider intelligence. There was another one. This was, I think, a study. I can find it if anybody wants to look at it. I think it was in either law or medical. It was one of those two fields. And again, they showed that if you use these chatbots, they got very high scores, better than most human beings. But they made one small, clever change. So they got the exact same test. And let's say there were four items to choose from, and one of them was the correct answer. They systematically replaced that correct answer with the line, none of the other solutions is correct, or none of the other answers is correct. And this caused a huge collapse in the performance of the machines. So under chance, I think, in some cases. And what that shows you is that the machines are good at what's called gradient descent, meaning if they know there's a right answer, they can self-regulate, as it were, towards that answer. But if they don't know what the answer is, then they can't do the internal mathematics, which is, variations on calculus. They can't do it, so they can't get better at it. And then you can see how good they are at open-ended problems, which humans are quite good at. So what's important when you're looking at these indicators and claims of general intelligence and super intelligence, and you need to do this right now, the data are really not in on how intelligent these things are or not. Next slide, please. So here's a case in point. So Jeffrey Hinton just got it says the Turing Award. Well, he just got the Nobel Prize as well. And based on data on machine learning and error detection, he said that people should stop training radiologists now. So that was in 2016. You can see on the next line, in 2015, since 2015, the salary is 48% higher because radiologists do an awful lot more than look at images. there's image detection plus a whole suite of other things that radiologists do. It's not saying that you can't use image detection to improve what you're doing as a radiologist, but this simplistic notion that if you get a complex set of tasks in a job and an AI machine, in this case, by the way, notice that it's machine learning, it's not chatbots, that if you can appear to remove a certain component, that the entire job goes away. Certainly not the case with radiologists. Next slide, please. I believe that Keith may have mentioned this in his talk, but we're beginning to see a peculiar effect, by the way, something that would be predicted by people who've spent time looking at cognitive psychology, educational psychology, is that if you don't use a skill or continue to develop a capacity, it tends to atrophy. So what you've got there are indications to show that if the extent to which you use anything, by the way, and this is why this is the essence of AI is nothing technological. If you have somebody else writing your essays for you, or if you go to a paper mill, or you've got some cheat sheets, you can make yourself look good, but not actually learn anything. And it turns out that if the machine steps in that capacity, your cognitive capacity to learn is still short-circuited because you're not putting the cognitive effort that's necessary in order to be able to learn. And the thing here about de-skilling is that there have been studies, there's at least one in, I think it was cancer detection, in which they randomly assigned people, which was nice, and showed that people who were reading these images with AI were as good or better than people reading the images without AI. However, after a period of training, I think it was months in using these tools, when they took the AI image detection tool away, the people who were quite good were now back to about the control condition. So there was actually a serious decay in their capacity to detect and understand images clinically. Again, if you're familiar with theories of learning, this is straight out of cognitive information processing. If you don't pay attention, it doesn't go into working memory. If you don't process it in working memory, it doesn't go into long-term memory. If you don't put it in with proper encoding, you can't retrieve it. No surprise at all. But the tools are being dumped into many sectors, including education and training. And the people who are designing them, it looks like, have very little training in how people learn. And if you ignore that, an intervention that is put together that doesn't understand cognitive load, doesn't understand human laziness, doesn't understand behavior modification, predictably you're going to get problems. And we're beginning to see those come to light. Next slide, please. So here's by the way, the links to these papers are in the notes in the slides. So how close is ChatGPT to human intelligence? So this is by a group that's quite anti-AGI, the general intelligence where a machine will be as good as a human being. So what they've done is they've looked at, so this is ChatGPT 4 and 5. And if you look at all the things that we expect humans to do from a cognitive psychology point of view, many of the things that we think are necessary are not even being touched. And the question of the value of the reasoning and the mathematics, a lot of it depends on the context of use. The mathematics is actually a very interesting exception, because some of the work that's being done, not only in International Olympiad silver and gold medals, where it's getting better than human beings, but there are some very difficult mathematics problems that human beings take months at that the machines are getting quite good at. And I would only go with the mathematics community's opinion on this, not on the marketing that you see from the AI companies. There was a recent claim that the ERDOS problems, ERDOS, were being solved routinely by ChatGPT 5. The mathematicians were surprised. I haven't read the story in depth, but it appears that the machine was finding solutions already on the web and then effectively taking credit for them. That said, some of the mathematical reasoning that the machines can do is quite impressive. as, by the way, as it is in protein folding. In fact, generally, anything that you can apply advanced machine learning to, weather prediction is much better. Precision medicine is getting better. And again, this is important in policy and training to make a distinction between machine and deep learning applications and chatbot language applications. Next slide, please. So here you've got, this is the same paper. They think that for human intelligence, you need common sense, knowledge of science, understanding of social science, and knowledge of history and culture. And you can see GPT-4 and 5 hardly appear on the radar here. So if the claim is being made that these are human intelligence or superhuman intelligence or something, you really have to demand something more than they did well on these indicators that I mentioned earlier. And to the extent that human intelligence is required for jobs and human intelligence is required to teach others, human intelligence is required for creativity and discovery, these machines have a very narrow channel. They're very impressive in some cases and really don't touch on many human capacities. Again, this is not to say that you couldn't get superbly impressive performance. And the proper analogy here probably is, if you want to fly, should you emulate a bird, or should you do what the Wright brothers did and used fixed wing with propulsion? So the birds look at airplanes with disdain, saying they're not really flying, but of course they really are. Next slide, please. So this is an indicator to, or a pointer to ONET. It's a US government site, and it keeps track of thousands of occupations, and it analyzes in terms of the training, the skills, the use of technology, the human skills, etc. Next slide, please. So these are just the cognitive abilities: attentiveness, item generation and reasoning, memory, memorization, perceptual abilities, quantitative abilities, spatial abilities, verbal abilities. And then there's other menus that I haven't expanded there. So this is a cross-cut of some of the things they look at, and any of these vary by job. So attentiveness in cosmetology is different than attentiveness in cosmology. And if you look up a job like computer science, it appears pretty much everywhere. This is pre-AI computer science. So this is just looking at the cognitive demands. So this notion that there's going to be huge displacement of human work, jury is not in on it. And if the machines are really very good at extending patterns in narrow areas, there'll be certain tasks they're good at, but to the extent that the tasks are dynamic and change or require conceptual advances or creativity, it's still unclear that they can do anything like that. By the way, this is now a beginning, an indicator of where schools should put attention, because we should be maximizing the things that humans are best at. And when it comes to AI, making sure that the tools that are introduced are not short-circuiting or ignoring any of these. So if somebody is doing an essay and or problem solving, and it requires any of the things you see there, to the extent that the machine cuts those steps out, and if the student just uses a prompt to write a final essay or report and didn't do anything, all of these are ignored. And that means that there's effectively no learning going on. And if that person ends up in a job where these capacities are required, they really should have paid greater attention to them while they were learning. These are the kind of the key aspects of how people learn that need to be attended to. Next slide, please. So these may not surprise you. I'm going to go through them quickly, but these are the taxonomies by Bloom, Kratwall, and others. So it's not like these things are not known in education research, psychology, cognitive psychology. And again, going back to Heidegger's point, you shouldn't give up your expertise. So knowing what we know here, we should demand these standards from these tools, that they at best augment and amplify these capacities, And at worst, they need to prove that they're not short-circuiting them. Next slide, please. So more cognitive goals. Next slide, please. And affective goals. So it's not just a question of having all the answers, right? You have to be able to receive information, respond, value it, organize yourself well, have consistency, be worth trusting, etc. Again, none of this is news. We know it. And by the way, that paper that you saw trying to analyze whether or not ChatGPT had human intelligence, many of them were advocating for or claiming that these machines were intelligent. And then they began to talk to disciplines like educational psychology who've been worried about exactly these problems. How do you design a good intervention of any kind for learning? And a lot is known about how people learn, why people learn, how to assess learning, and by the way, how to motivate people. I went to a talk last summer given by Dicerbo, Dicerbo. It was on their results from using Khan Academy and AI. The program is Khanmigo, Khanmigo. And they have the biggest data set in the world. And they've been using ChatGPT 4 since the August before it was released to the public. And one of their findings is you can have excellent task analysis and excellent potential tutoring, but if the students are not motivated, it's all for naught. This is in some ways a salutary finding, but we know that motivation is a problem without even worrying about AI. Again, it's important that teachers, educators, researchers in the so-called learning sciences need to continue to insist on what's been learned over about 100 years and how people learn, and then insist that none of this be short-circuited and proven that it can amplify without doing any atrophying to how people learn or perform their jobs. Next slide, please. So here, this is a paper. While Gen AI tools can improve academic performance, they raise deeper concerns. So this awareness is coming. It's so hard to know though, because these studies are probably based on, from ChatGPT's point of view, they're probably maybe up to GPT-4, and things change and new tools come in. But the good news is they're recognizing that if you maintain a distance from AI and say, what are the critical criteria about how people learn and how to teach them and tutor them, to the extent that whatever the tool is, whether it's flashcards, programmed instruction by B.F. Skinner, rote learning in mathematics or reading, some techniques, whatever they are, including AI techniques, will short circuit some cognitive and learning and motivational processes, and others may not. And I think we should have skepticism until proven otherwise. Next slide. So this is just an overview of theories of learning. The effects of classical and operant conditioning, this is pretty well understood in social media, and none of it is a good story. And it's important to ask the people who are producing these tools, will you be taking advantage of the classical and operant conditionings that are keeping people scrolling on TikTok till 2 a.m? And are people engaged in anger and resentment and the things that keep people glued to the machine so that the people who are running the machine can sell you advertising? It sounds cynical, but I think that's actually a reasonably good presentation. If you're interested in this, there's the person to look at is Tristan Harris, Harris, the Center for Humane Technology. He's the person who tracks the ill effects of social media and how they're so powerful. We've done a little bit about information processing and cognitive information processing, like attentional retrieval and so forth. Under cognitive and affective models, we're really not seeing much in terms of cognitive apprenticeship, developmental models. The biological factors, some CEO of some social media company once said that our greatest enemy is sleep. This is serious because the technologies that were developed under social media can now be improved by putting a chatbot in front of it who gives the impression that they're your friend and can feed you with information, videos, slides, whatever the case may be, that keeps you attracted to it. There's a lot of work being done on the biological impacts of lack of sleep, artificial light in the middle of the night, including the blue light that comes off these technologies. It's quite problematic. It's probably only going to be made worse if you don't get regulation of these chatbots. And as the Romans used to say, mens sana in corpore sano, a healthy mind and a healthy body. So if you get nutritional problems, because people, I mean, this is not AI, but the work that was done on kids watching TV and also on video games, you get very little exercise and you tend to fill up on snacks. So you're looking for something that are high caffeine, high sugar. So to the extent that these AI tools are going to exacerbate that problem, this needs clear attention. Don't have a lot of time. Oh, am I done at time already? 3 o'clock. Okay. All right. Anyway, if you're familiar with theories of learning, we started about 10 minutes late. So if you can just bear with me. Next slide, please. This just appeared. This is somebody, I think she's from Italy, saying that if you're going to create AI, align it with what we know. So here's a paper on aligning with what we know about child development. Next slide, please. Here's 2 more papers making the same point, that if you don't pay attention to human cognitive functioning and you don't pay attention to how people learn, you get good or bad outcome using any intervention, including AI. Next slide, please. Makes the same point. This is a review of intelligent tutoring systems showing that intelligent tutoring systems have been around since at least the 1970s. And this is a review saying they sometimes work, they sometimes don't, and they tend to work when their principles align with how people learn, how to teach well with a lot of teacher support. And again, we should be skeptical that quote unquote AI tutors will be significantly better than this, knowing that literally millions and millions of dollars have been spent in designing intelligent tutoring systems that have reasonable but not impressive, overly impressive effect sizes. Next slide, please. So this is a report from the OECD. They looked at educational research, and this is their point, which says that if policymakers don't get behind it, so there's an infinite number of research questions that can be done, and many that are now necessary because of AI, like the studies you've just seen. But as you know, in the US at the moment, educational funding and research, educational research funding has been cut significantly. It's rather unfortunate at a time when we need research on exactly these points. But this makes the point that even though you've got educational research findings, if you don't get teacher training, mobilization of communities, and ongoing support from policymakers, it may not amount to anything. Next slide, please. So this is the final point that I want to make, is that you often hear, oh, we've seen lots of technologies before. This is just more of the same. This will be like the video strip or the video disc or whatever the case may be. It's very important to realize that LLMs are not programs, they're portals. So when you start chatting with a chatbot, it has been trained on billions of documents and you're really not sure what they are, but many of them are ill-intended and they are open to motivation. They're open to being motivated to have bias, even when you tell them not to have bias. You can see a report there, pretty simple thing where they had different bots trying to sell you something. And in order to increase the sales, they started to promote mistrust, misbehavior, hoping to get a sale. It's very bad. And this is in simple sales. So that even though you are telling it to remain truthful, the alignment between your goals as the creator and what the machine does in order to generate what it considers a positive autocomplete for this customer, it can end up doing things that are quite unexpected. So these things are portals into other worlds, and we really don't know how they do what they do, how to predict it, and how to do something if they turn problematic. Next slide, which is the final one. So there's something called AI-driven psychosis and suicide. These are vulnerable people, oftentimes adolescents. There's a couple of cases going through the US courts in which at least there's the plaintiffs claim that the machines set up trusting relationships with them. And then when these depressed people said that they wanted to end their lives, the machines encouraged them to come join them. I think it will all come out when the court case is actually done. But this is very important. So when these things are put into homes or into schools, they're like social media in the sense that you go on one of these social media channels, it finds out what you like, and then it feeds you other stuff, even if it's detrimental, because it's not judging the detriment, it's judging the engagement. So this predates AI. And again, look at the Center for Humane Technology for the research on this. By the way, that same group driven by Tristan Harris is very much anti what chatbots can do. And you are getting very powerful video models now. You'll have seen them, Sora and Veo from OpenAI and Google, respectively, in which you can create very impressive disinformation and fake videos. I'll just mention one. There's a Neil deGrasse Tyson is a famous cosmologist in the US. African-American gentleman, runs the Hayden Planetarium. He is a superb communicator. He does programs that used to be talking about the cosmos, Star Talk and others. But there are now videos out there using his likeness and his voice that are very impressive. I mean, I've watched many of his videos, and looking at it, I couldn't tell that it's him. And they have him saying, I used to be a cosmologist, I used to believe in the universe, but now I'm convinced that the world is flat. And then he talks about all the arguments. And the problem is that if you come across videos like this without the cognitive preparation to detect misinformation, or you don't have the cognitive understanding of the science, you can be significantly misled, which is creating an ecological problem for schools that they didn't want. So you've got the problem of, do you put the tools into the classroom under what conditions? But these tools have been adapted en masse. It's the greatest uptake of tools ever in the diffusion of any innovation. So these things are available in society. So teachers are going to have kids coming in saying, Neil deGrasse Tyson says the world is flat and you don't know as much as he does. Convince me otherwise. So I guess it's mostly a set of caveat emptor or caveat educator. Okay, well, sorry we started late. I hope this is of some value. The slides are available with Catherine, so if you want a copy, please feel free to ask her. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. Very, very informative. If you have a question for Professor Kelly, we just want to raise your hand in the chat and I'll unmute you and you can ask him yourself.
Yeah, and by the way, this is 4 walls, so I'm happy to take questions. Far more exciting and interesting.
I actually have a question myself. Just in terms of policy, what do you think is the best approach? Because a policy obviously takes time and by the time it's created, it's out of date. And what kind of approach would you recommend in terms of kind of developing policy around AI?
The policy is a global responsibility. It's a global political responsibility, and too often, overburdened teachers are told, you're in the position to know, you teach the material, you do assessment, this is your problem. So there isn't a good, insofar as AI is yet forming, and there's tens of thousands of companies producing tools. So you're producing policy for what exactly? Right? So it's an infinite problem in the sense of an infinite verb. Nothing is settled down. I mean, we can have a policy about textbooks, but this thing is quite different. So I think that it's I know that, for example, I see Aisling there. So Aisling works on Japanese lesson study. And what you've got there is a distributed responsibility across teachers to take on the problem, right? Well, the Carnegie Foundation for Teaching in the US has networked improvement communities, which are like an outside layer outside the Japanese lesson study. And the networked improvement communities get policymakers involved in the decision making that the teachers are going to do for the learners, right? It's a distributed responsibility problem. So any policy document that dictates what teachers should do without taking full responsibility for their actions and all the networks that are in that government or industry, it's kind of a hopeless situation, because you can see what happened with South Korea when they went into it. But you're in a situation in which, like I said, you have mass adoption of these tools so that students can do a number of things. They can get totally off track with some of these bots, just personally off track. But they can end up in a situation where you get end up in a situation in which the machine does the work. So what should the policy be? If the policy is, well, you should assess better, well, that requires money. I mean, there's reasons why people use multiple choice and essay tests, because there's not enough money to do the equivalent of a dissertation defense with somebody to find out what they really know. So, like I say, the policy documents require not just governments around the world producing policy documents and putting them up in the OECD observatory, but getting together, as you would in Japanese lesson study, and saying, what are the key points here that are facing, let's say in this case, education, although you could do same thing in the workforce, but saying, what are the issues? And this is billions are being spent on these tools. It's going to cost billions of investments in policymakers talking to interdisciplinary experts, including educators, to take these on things systematically and globally. Otherwise, I mean, like, what's the policy? Use it judiciously. That's not a policy. Ensure that it doesn't get misused is not a policy. And banning AI is not a policy. It's everywhere. I mean, there's nothing I can do with technology that doesn't have something pop up and tell me that it's a co-pilot, right? It's in Excel, it's in word processing. It's impossible to get away from this. And it's really a dramatic problem, because in prior diffusion of technologies, there was a huge ignorance, and I mean this word appropriately, a lack of knowledge in parents and homes and kids. Like, so how do you use a computer? What is a computer, right? Nobody had a computer. So the schools could have a computer lab, and they could train the teachers on those computers. And they had somebody to maintain the computers for privacy. And they knew all of the programs were on floppy disks, right? Or CDs, meaning that it was a closed-end problem. It wasn't a portal. But with this, because we've got these supercomputers in our hands, the chatbots can work through apps or any one of the browsers, so that you have access to a supercomputer that's got access to everything that's ever been written, libraries of information, all good and bad, access to, on the positive side, good science using Wolfram Alpha, good mathematics if it hands it off to the right machines. So what you've got a problem in setting policy for deterministic technologies, where you can control them, looking at deterministic problems, which there's a right answer, but then all the stuff that really matters, openness, unsolved problems, undetermined problems, creativity, and so forth, they're weaker there, getting better, but the policy has to cover the gamut. And where in a teacher's day are they going to get the training? Right?
Absolutely.
And I had a slide, but I deleted it. But somebody just did a review of the number of programs at the BA level in the US training computer science students to work in AI, right? I think it's like 30%. 70% of the universities don't have the faculty who can teach about it, and we expect the teachers to take the downstream accounts of that and make sense of it. Ludicrous. Sorry, Patrick, that was a...
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
But let me say in general, I think that if we honor what we've learned about learning, and by the way, if we're clever, we can get these machines to help us do better cognitive neuroscience. There's evidence of that. In special education, we can learn an awful lot more. So that thing that does the subtle covert speech, you could have kids who've got aphasia, right, or language problems, and engage them directly. There's a huge number of upsides, right? So what's a good policy? Put money into the upsides, train people in that, pause as best you can on the things that could be detrimental, have a public information campaign about the fact there are portals of information as well as of misinformation as well as information, and engage educational research, psychological research, cognitive psychology research to come up with clear criteria for how anybody would judge whether any intervention was likely to short-circuit learning or amplify it. And then reflect all of that back onto the AI companies and tax them.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Awesome. Catherine, go ahead.
I thought your talk was really interesting and really informative. So just to say thank you so much for giving the time. I think one of the things that is felt within some in our community is this feeling of wanting to be able to say to students, you cannot use generative AI unless we tell you that we're opting in. And I'm trying to think about how do you navigate around those spaces where whether you decide that the student is opting in or not for your module, they could be opting in themselves because there's so much on their devices. In some ways, they can't even escape it. It's embedded in every type of technology. So, how do you put a pause on these things? Or do you say, look, we can't put a pause on these things, and instead we try to direct students in ways that they can use generative AI that's not going to affect their cognitive learning, or which is going to give them fundamental skills, or which are maybe more positive aspects of it? What do you think? How do you strike the balance there?
So the good news is that people have been looking at various forms of assessment for a long time in education, and we shouldn't forget about them, right? There's cognitive apprenticeship ideas, there's project-based methods, there's social groups. In my own case, I have changed the assignments I look for. If the assignment can be done by AI, I don't assign it. And I can't control their use of AI tools in my class when they're at home, and I can't control it anywhere else. But I've gone to using a lot of group-based activities where they're meeting face-to-face. And then you get a certain amount of self-policing because you don't want to be the person who is not carrying their weight because the grade is distributed across the team. Now, they may go home and do that, right? So it's going to take a lot of creativity and more money, right? And another thing, it's important, again, cheating, so to speak, predates AI, right? It's been going on a long time. And the data on cheating, which, by the way, we know a lot about, if you think other people are doing it and they're getting an advantage, and you think you won't be caught, and if the cost is low, why not? Right? So you turn in an honest essay and you get a C, and they turned in a fake essay and get an A. Well, after a while, you're going to modify your behavior, right? Because those people with a high GPA are getting into law school and you're not. Right? So there's a dynamic that's not up to a teacher to fix, but it's the general concern you're talking about. Another thing I say to my students is, do they consider that the money they pay for tuition is counterfeit, or is it legal tender? Because the money you're paying legal is a counterfeit. Okay. Do you want to get an education, and what does that mean for you? And I tell them, like, if you put your mind to it, you can probably fool me into giving you a counterfeit certificate of learning, a counterfeit grade. Right? Then ask yourself, is that a fair trade? You've got student debt, you've saved up this money, it's all legitimate. You could have spent it on a trip to Florence, but you've decided to get an education with it. then you need to self-regulate and don't cheat yourself. And fooling me into my giving you a grade because you used one of these tools, it debases my time. If you're part of a group, it debases their actions they did with you, and you're leaving with a counterfeit diploma that may have cost you in the US, $16,000 a year for 3 or 4 years. So there has to be a personal responsibility on self-regulation with these tools. Because if somebody does it as a steady diet, by the time they get into jobs that does require these cognitive skills, they're just not going to have the practice, right? So they're going to continue to lose. A question came up there in the chat. Let me just see what that was. Yeah, Mark Passion. Yes, this is exactly right. And the trick question is how to do that, right? I mean, I'm sure this sounded quite negative, but I think it's good to be negative because the downstream effects that are negative are quite negative. However, there are upstream possibilities. And again, Patrick, back to you. The policy should be putting money into how to respond to that last comment. What do we know about learning that's not working? For normal learners, so to speak, neurotypical learners, neuroatypical learners, and where can something like these chatbots, who are actually quite sophisticated in diagnosis. So if you write an essay, it requires going to the library, looking things up, taking notes, organizing your notes, sketching something out, looking at it and deciding it was terrible, revising the whole thing, looking at it again and realizing you left out 5 points. All of this cognitive work is going on anyway. And again, talk really isn't about AI. If we're giving essays or final exams in which we don't know the amount of cognitive effort the person put into it, we're no different than turning an AI product in, right? If they have been doing the cognitive work, right, they copied somebody else's work or they went to a paper mill or whatever, you don't know that right now if you get a final product. You don't know what you assume that if it's a false positive problem, it looks like it has all the elements, but you don't know that they went through the cognitive struggle for all of those elements. Right? Well, these things are on 24 hours a day, right? So you could be tracking. I mean, Patrick, here's another thing. Universities should get together as a consortium, get cheap models and train them to be locked so that if you want to use the internet, you have to use our model. You can't go out on the general internet. And then you could track what people are doing. And you could see, is the person using good library skills? How are they developing their vocabulary? All the things that we know about reading comprehension, writing comprehension, it's not like we know nothing. We know an awful lot. And we could reflect those back on the tools. And it could be looking over the shoulder of somebody saying, I know you're starting to write your essay, but I noticed you've only looked up one source. Maybe you need to recycle on that. Or you brought the source up, and as far as I can see, you only read the abstract. Right? So there is significant upside if we did close diagnostic work and then use the best of the machines to supplement that, or supplement with a human tutor. Or if you did that across 30 kids in your class or 30,000 across a county, you could be getting distinct profiles in the cognitive progress of learning at a micro level across the board, which could significantly improve the tools and significantly improve human tutoring and teaching. And, Aisling has the model already working for, there's an unexplored use of these machines as more knowledgeable others in a Vygotskian sense. They know an awful lot, right? So Etienne Wenger, Wenger, who does the work on learning communities, he's got at least one paper where they've introduced a chatbot as part of the learning community or the community of practice. And those can be quite useful. MIT has a collective IQ department. That's what they do, collective IQ. We would consider it group problem solving or brainstorming. They trained up ChatGPT with brainstorming principles. and then did a nice study, randomly assigned. They had people who were just problem solving, people problem solving with a list of things, and then people problem solving where they're getting reminders from the machine. And the ones getting the reminders from the machine did the best. So there's a case in which you've got known cognitive techniques and you're using the machine at its best to help the kid who's not paying attention or doesn't have good metacognition or good self-regulation skills. It's then augmenting them by filling that approach.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Just one last question from Keith Young.
Thanks, Patrick, and thank you. The presentation was absolutely fantastic and informative, and actually refining a little bit of my own thinking around it. And thank you for the shout outs.
Keith, I loved your talk.
Those were flattering. My question actually is a little bit of an extension of Patrick's and Catherine's. So Catherine was really kind of talking at the level we're at right now, like in third level institutions and all that. But a number of weeks ago, the Department of Education here finally released some guidance on AI in schools. And one thing they've kind of signposted within that was a draft EU AI literacy framework that's being developed for both primary and secondary education. And one of the key debates I'm coming across a lot when I'm talking with teachers and everything like that is the difference between learning about AI and learning with AI. And at what stage is it appropriate for learners to learn about AI by actually using it? And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts from that standpoint. There's models with guardrails that can be developed and all that.
Yeah, it goes back to that, maybe the second or third slide. The what is AI? So if AI literacy is learning about AI, it's a moving target, right? And it's not clear how deeply you need to know it for it to make a difference, right? So if any of us are driving home and the car stops, we don't have a clue, right? So do you need to know how a car works to be able to drive a car, right? It's a different question. How do you get from A to B safely and quickly, right? So to the extent that learning about AI and how the machines work gives you skepticism about it, I think it's great. Learning about what AI is and its potential displacement by routinizing people's work, yes, good to know that as a citizen, right, as an educated person. Knowing how AI works and that the companies who are running it are following a profit margin, right? They're not following a social justice or, I would say, necessarily ethical approach. With that said, Microsoft just came out with a statement that they're going to emphasize what they call humanistic AI. And they've decided education, I think it's precision medicine and clean energy, right? They've decided that the rest of it is just not what they want. Their values no longer go in that direction, right? So it's a hard, open question. And learning about AI, I mean, if AI is in this machine, it's like, do you need to know the chemical composition of air to breathe it? Not really, and you probably don't want to know. So I don't know. The learning about it, I think if you're talking about a literacy that rewards your own critical thinking, that tells you to be suspicious about it and how to think about anybody trying to fool you, and anybody who is fulfilling a goal that is in their corporate interest, but not necessarily in yours or societal, right? If you got that level of consideration about it, I think that's a worthy thing to do. Because what you want to do, and I hope it's coming across somewhat in the talk, is that you have to retreat to first principles about how people learn. And you have to retreat to first principles of ethics. And you have to retreat to first principles about social responsibility. And then the burden of proof is on the person selling you the product, right? That it meets your criteria. And again, this can't be done by one teacher, one school, probably even one country. But that has to be I think the approach if you're going to get good. After that, the learning with any intervention, like it could be a human tutor, is the extent to which that intervention has the capacity to actually help. The fact that it's AI or something else doesn't by itself guarantee that. So what you need to do there is you're retreating to first principles on how people learn And we need to learn an awful lot more about that. And these tools could be very good at it, as I say. But it should be the case in which I'm learning about how to be an AI consumer for learning, where I look at what something is doing and I look at it and I say, that's mostly distraction, right? I don't want it in the classroom. Or this thing too easily comes up with a product that looks like I learned something when I didn't, right? And then you've got a reason to object to it. So sorry, Keith, it's just a hard problem. It's just a hard problem. And it's particularly hard. Recent article, Matt, let me just see what this is. Yeah, the importance of soft skills and all of this, critical thinking, that's all true. But so that's kind of the half answer to the first one, right? Teaching critical skills about AI. But these things are the most transformative invention human beings have ever come up with, because they're modeled loosely on how the brain works on these neural nets. And it was an utter surprise to everybody. I learned about old-fashioned AI in the 1980s at Stanford University. And we weren't doing neural nets. We were told that neural nets couldn't work. We were shown a proof from MIT that what you're seeing now working couldn't work. And the reason why it couldn't work is they didn't realize we didn't have enough data and we didn't have supercomputers. So instead, we were trained on how to do language reproduction by grammar, parts of grammar, and very simplistic semantics. And it went absolutely nowhere. Went absolutely nowhere until these neural nets were able to find patterns in language that we didn't know were there. What's remarkable about them, they are wrongly described as machines that guess the next word or the next token. That's completely misrepresenting what they're doing. They have no words. They have got hyperdimensional space of a staggering number of nodes that represents relationships between languages that it's picked up by reading and completing billions and billions and billions of lines of human text. And what's remarkable about it is it's able to pick up, because it knows a particular word leads to another word, like, for example, zoo. It will then auto-predict lions and tigers. But it also learns that working here is like working in a zoo, because it has picked up that connotation. And it also has read The Wizard of Oz, and it knows that it's lions and tigers and bears, oh dear. Right? So it's got a semantic network of concepts, so to speak. So the directions in which it goes are quite remarkable. It has picked up a sense of time. It has picked up a sense of geography. It has picked up a sense of argumentative grammar from human beings. It's picked up logic. And when you put in PDFs of sophisticated scientific information, it gets even better. And we're a hop, step, and a jump from the technology that's driving autonomous cars, right, which is essentially on-the-spot video learning, right, because the image is coming into the camera just like watching a video. Jan LeCun at Meta is looking explicitly at next image generation, not just next word or token, but next image based on the logic and the physics of the videos that it's seen. Tesla is apparently putting their technology into the Optimus robot, which means it can walk around your house and do a whole bunch of things, right? It's looking at oncoming traffic, looking at you, passing you in the stairs, no difference. And he's also got Grok, which is doing large language modeling and reasoning. And you start putting those together, and after a while, you're coming up with something that's quite impressive. We're going to look back at the good old days when all we had to worry about was chatbots, right? And what are we going to do with these quite impressive machines? On the positive side, they'll transform health and medicine in very welcome ways. With judicious policy, they'll improve learning. They're going to utterly transform work and who gets to work and how it gets valued. And there's effectively no stopping it because there's too much money being invested in it. Fantastic time to be around if you're interested in complex problems.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. No, finish
No, no,
finish
no.
what you're saying.
Yeah,
Dick.
I mean, of all people, philosophers are going to come back into vogue. What does it all mean? And it'll
Absolutely.
centralize questions of value through wisdom traditions and religions, right? We're going to be in a position where we're going to be, I think, probably back in effectively an oral culture, right? I mean, reading is just, there's a man called, the researcher called, what's his name? He's Stanislas Dehaene, Dehaene. He works in INSERM in France, and he's a mathematician, neuroscientist, and he's done superb work on how the brain works. And he has written a book on how the brain learns mathematics, how the brain learns to read, and his most recent book is how we learn from a cognitive neuroscience point of view. So you have got revolutions happening everywhere. But if you look at, I was talking about those wearable devices, the goggles, the glasses that talk to you. Laptops are going to be obsolete. These things are pretty much going to be obsolete. There's something out now called, I think it's called Stream AI, which is a ring that you put on your finger and you talk to it all the time. You can even whisper and it picks it up. So you can wander around, you can see the videos, you wander around and talk to yourself, and it's making notes, booking restaurants. It's going to be, I think, an oral culture with an invisible super intelligence available through machines utterly invisible to us. And like I say, we look back at these saying, what a dated talk, worrying about such trivial problems as chatbots.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And really appreciate your insights. Really, really interesting. Thank you so much. Just to let everybody know, we recorded this talk and it will be available on our YouTube channel on iCare and also on the MIC website. So again, I just want to thank Professor Kelly. Thank you so much for your insights, and thank you everybody for joining us. We hope we see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thanks for the invitation to speak.